Okay, so this is the leather repair kit that I bought. It was 20 quid on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description for you, plus postage. And the idea is that this is a little kit which has got a very small amount of everything that a professional would use to repair leather or leather seats. I specifically bought it for my car, but it could equally be used on any sofa or anything like this. So let's just have a little look at what we've got in here. So we've got a couple of sponges. These are used for dabbing the colourant onto the seats at the end. We've got a little bottle of gloss finish here. Got some leather prep, which is essentially leather cleaner, which we'll put there. These are some colour mixings to adjust the tone of the colourant. So this is our leather colourant, which is black. We can adjust the tone, we can lighten it, we can add a little bit of red and a little bit of blue if we want. We mix it up in these little pots. Now this is a black pack. I assume if you go for different colours you get a big bottle of white or whatever the other colourant that you choose is. Got some leather glue here if there's a cut or a scratch or something, a cut which you've got to stick back down. And here we have matte finish, so this is with the gloss finish, so you can have the finish as it is. You can mix in some matte finish if it's too glossy, or you can add gloss finish. I believe you add that afterwards, but we'll get to that later. And we've got this is some filler. So if you've got holes or scratches or anything, you fill this in. It's like a flexible rubbery filler that you can then sand once it's gone hard, and it will fill any gaps, cracks, scratches. 1200 grit sandpaper, already got some of that. Instruction manual, mixing guide for colour mixing, how to get different levels of matte, gloss, how to adjust your coloration, how to achieve different colorations, etc. Full instructions here on what to do with cracking, splitting, tearing, any holes, if you've got burns, scuff scratches, even cat scratches, stain spills, how to match the colour, which is dealt with here, and then how to apply the colour here. So I won't be doing all of this. I really only have got a little bit of cracking, basically. No real gaps, but I will be using some of this filler in the cracks. So I'm really only going to be looking at the cracking because I don't have any burns. There's not really many scratches or anything. It's fairly decent condition. We'll have a look in the sunshine and see what we get. What else have we got in here? We've got a little scalpel for trimming the edges if you've got any cuts and tears. Various cotton buds and dabs and cocktail sticks. Lolly stick, some mixing spatula thingies, or spreading spatulas, probably spreading. We have a pipette to help us for mixing all of the different fluids together. This piece of what looks to me to be some kind of polishing cloth and cleaning cloth. A little bit unnecessary to some extent, I would say. Most of us would be able to sort that out, but it's nice that they've put a little bit of everything that's necessary. Now the idea here with this kit is not to fix the entire seat, it's just to match the colour and repair the bits that need repairing. So that's the idea, but that's everything that you get in the kit. And now I think it's time to go outside and have a look at what we've got to try and repair. So before we begin, I just want to say I made a bit of a mistake. I went straight in for the filler when all I had was some creases on the bolster of the seat. I didn't have any cracks to fill. I didn't really need to use the filler. I wasn't aware of that at the time. I flew straight in to try and fill the creases and try and smooth it all out and make it look nice. What I didn't realise was I would completely lose the texture of the leather, which actually ended up making it look worse, in my opinion, than it would have done if I'd not used the filler at all and just spent my time re-dyeing. And the other problem I had there was I spent so much time on the filler trying to get the filler right, and once you start filling, you start spreading further and you start filling a bit more, and then you're like, oh, shall I finish the whole panel? You know, these things tend to drift. Don't recommend that unless you've got like a crack in the leather which has got a gap and a hole that looks really unsightly. Then yes, absolutely, that's what the filler's for, but it's not for filling the creases, in my opinion, as I did. I think overall the finish of the seat suffered from that. And what I didn't do was spend enough time testing the black dyeing function. of the kit. So I ended up with too much gloss. What I should have done is not spent the time on the filler, and actually spent all my time matching the finish of the rest of the seat with a good colour black, lightened so it matches the rest of the seat in age, which I didn't quite get right, and also so that it wasn't quite as glossy as it was. There's some stuff you can put in to make it more satin matte finish. You can't really fix that once it's on. So once I'd done that, it was too late. And the other thing to remember is when you're dyeing, don't try and do part of a panel. You have to do the whole panel. So if you're going to dye one part of a panel, go all the way to the edges if you want to get any kind of a uniform finish. So learn from my mistakes. You can learn from my mistakes, and then you won't have to make them yourself. So with no further ado, let's get on with it. So here's my lovely seat. It's black, and as you can see on the bolster, it's very, very worn. It's gone down to grey. So time to take the 1200 grit sandpaper to it and just kind of take the top surface off, smooth it out a little bit. Off camera I did a thorough clean of this with Meguiar's all-purpose cleaner. So the leather was already thoroughly cleaned, and then I wiped it down with some of the leather cleaner that came with the pack. So the leather is pretty darn clean at the moment. So we go sandy, 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 sandy. It's quite painstaking, and one of the worst things about it is you actually start taking off all the nice black finish, and you're literally ruining your seats as you do it. But the idea is to get a nice good surface for the colourant to key to, so you get a nice long lasting finish. That's the idea. I'm not sure that how necessary it was. I'm just following the instructions in the pack. So then you give it a quick wipe down, get all the sanding dust off, and then we're ready to get cracking with the filler, which I didn't need. There we go, that stuff, yeah. I put that stuff all over the place. Should not have done that, but here we go. So one of the things that the pack came with was basically a lollipop stick for applying this stuff, which wasn't very good because it's solid wood. You'd be much better off with a thin flexible plastic, like a plastic food spatula or something that can contour just a little bit to the shape of the seat. But it worked. You can get a finish, a reasonable finish, but it's not easy to work with this filler. The filler kind of dries quite quickly. And so you have to work quite swiftly with it, and if you go back over it, what I found was the more you go over it, the more damage you do. So try and get it right in the first sort of 10 seconds, and then it is what it is, basically. You're not going to be reworking it too much. Once 30-40 seconds have gone by, reworking doesn't improve things at all. So just bear that in mind if you do need to do any of this filling. I've already done too much at this point. I had a couple of creases on that part of the bolster which I wasn't very keen on, but with hindsight you can see all the creases I'm talking about there. They're the bits where you've got the lines, but all the other little bits you can see is all that lovely leather texture being filled in, and you'll never see it again. And whilst even at the end of this video you can't really see the finish very well on screen, I really wasn't happy with it. The combination of the gloss level being wrong and too much filling. There we go, look at that, slapping it all over the place. Did not need to do anything there, but there we go. Look, oh, more, put some more there. Go on then. Yeah, why not? Yeah, everywhere. So there we go. I've got my sandpaper out now. It's dried. I've given it some time there, and now you've got to sand it nice and smooth. Got to give it plenty of time to dry. Make sure it's properly dry before you start sanding, otherwise you're going to have a problem. And just keep sanding and tidy up all of the mess you made with the filler that you didn't need to put on there. And hello, spider. Yeah, I spotted him. So much sanding was required. This took, honestly, this filler process took up so much of my will to live that I didn't spend anywhere near enough time matching the colour, which is a massive regret of mine. So a little bit of cleanup. I used a toothpick to pick some of the big chunks out, because when you get that filler near the sewn joins, it fills. Nightmare. So here we go. Now I'm happy with that, relatively. I realised I'd gone too far at that point and stopped, and it was what it was. So here we go with the colour test. I'd done so much work on the filler, I only did sort of like 2 little tests, and I was apparently happy. I made a mistake here by testing on the bit that I'd worked. I should have found a little lower end back bit that nobody could ever see when it was in the car, and tested on a bit of the original black leather that hadn't been sanded and hadn't been filled, because then you can do a few spots and really work at getting the colour and tone correct. Because if you don't, it just looks like some amateur geezer has come in and tried to restore your leather seats badly, which was essentially the result. I mean, it turned out nice, because the guy who actually came to buy these seats off me, he bought them to put in like a Frogger, an off-road Frogger, so I don't think he was particularly worried. I think he just wanted heated sports seats for his car, so that's what he got. So lovely job. So I was happy with that. Thumbs up. And time to get our little foam applicators and start applying. Look out now. Here we go. Cue the music. The instructions say to do sort of like an initial wipe and then just dab. So, or actually I think the instructions just told me to dab. So I started trying wiping, but that didn't get a particularly good finish. So you do dabbing, but what you need to know about the colorant is actually a thick layer that goes on top. It is not a dye that soaks in. It is a thin rubbery layer of colorant that sits on top of the leather. So it's not going to soak in, you're not going to get a combined finish like you would with a dye. It literally is a colorant, and that's why it's not called a dye. And you get this, if you don't get the gloss right, you get these patchy bits, which is why I ended up having to do the entire panel of each panel that I did any work on, because there was no way to match the finish. So I had to do each full panel eventually, and I ended up going over it 4 or 5 times. There's a lot of work I did off camera actually, ultimately, and I still wasn't happy with the result. So I would have been quite disappointed if they were the seats for my car, and I probably would have needed to change them for my own idiom. And there you have it, a reasonable job. I mean, to be honest, there it doesn't look too bad. It does look too glossy, it was, but not too bad. I mean, considering it looked really, really tired before, it would now stand up to a cursory inspection, but I can tell you in the flesh, it really didn't stand up. The difference, the texture from all the filler was clearly visible. You could see everywhere where I'd done the filler, it reflected in the texture and in the gloss response and everything. So yeah, I wasn't particularly happy with that, how that bit went. But there we go. That's how I slightly improved my seats.